Hello everyone and welcome back to a brand new video, and welcome to our F125 controller versus wheel comparison video. Yes, this is normally one of the most anticipated videos I do inside every F1 game. It's kind of become a bit of a tradition on the channel at this point, that on day one we head to Spa, I try and get a lap on the board on a wheel, and then I head out on a controller and kind of explain all the differences. Now, of course, all the usual caveats as we get into this video still apply. I normally race on a wheel inside the F1 games. It's of course just what I do, but I'm well aware there are a lot of you out there that do use a controller inside this game, so don't read too much into the lap times, because again, I'm much quicker on a wheel than I am on a controller. This is kind of far more about some of the other information, some of the other differences that you get inside the game, and some of the nuance, because I do firmly believe that for F125, EA have done a pretty good job at balancing things out. We'll kickstart then, of course, with my Fanatec wheel hot lap. Of course, if you're interested in buying some Fanatec products, there'll be a link down in the description below where you can help support me as well. But I think F125's physics, the best way to describe them is somewhere between F124 and F123. They're quite good. They're a lot better than they were on F124. Kind of the requirement to just absolutely whack on steering lock as you go into corners is nowhere near as difficult as it was inside F124. You have got to be a lot smoother with the car on turning, otherwise it's just going to understeer. You don't feel like you've kind of got unlimited grip at the front end anymore. The car kind of reacts a lot more to curbs as well. You have to be far less aggressive with kind of where you're placing the car as well. You can't kind of attack curbs in the same way you could inside F124. You have got to be a bit more careful. The car, you know, it can get thrown off the road slightly. You can break traction a lot more and things like that. The traction as well is also a lot better. It's worse, but because of it, it's better. There's a lot less grip. You know, you can't just throw the car in and then mash your foot to the floor. We've noticed, especially in the wet, actually, there's a really big difference, and you can really struggle to try and get the power down off of corners as well. So all of those things added together have kind of created a much more immersive experience. You know, I think if you're a driver that kind of is naturally quite good behind the wheel, then you're going to be quite rewarded on this game, rather than people that obviously just grind out laps of time trial and things like that. There is kind of a lot more natural instinct inside F125, in my opinion, than there was inside F124, which I think is a good thing as well. So yeah, it is definitely a fun handling model. That's kind of the question that I've been asked, you know, the most of all. It is definitely a lot more fun than F124 to drive, at least in my opinion, because again, I prefer to have a more realistic experience inside the game, if you will. That being said, though, you'd think for controller players that that would be a really bad sign, because of course we don't drive real cars with controllers, but they really have made some subtle tweaks for F125 that kind of give the controller players a kind of helping hand, if you will. I wouldn't say they've got an advantage. To be honest, I would still say the wheel is going to be the quicker platform once again inside F125. But you definitely notice on the controller there is a little bit of ABS in the car naturally. Of course, all of these laps are done with zero assists, anything like that. But yeah, on the controller, you definitely feel like you can brake a little bit later into a corner and kind of get away without looking at the fronts. There's definitely a little bit of traction control in there as well, just to kind of make your life a little bit easier on the exits of corners. As you can see there, I got a little bit of a wobble out of the chicane, the Lecombe chicane at the top of the hill. And on a wheel, I might have gone round there. On a controller, like I said, it just gives, it kind of holds your hand a little bit. It doesn't completely override the feeling of the car or anything like that, but of course, you know, you've only got triggers rather than pedals on a controller, so it does kind of, it keeps the game fun, I think, for controller players, which is the really good thing. But of course, you know, it does still allow wheel users. I'm going to say it, I think the wheel is definitely going to be quicker again inside F125. I'm under no illusion that, you know, if you and your mate are identically paced, but you're on a wheel, he's on a controller, you are most likely going to have the upper hand in most scenarios as well, which ultimately I think is fair at the end of the day. You know, I think controller players are generally going to be playing the game more casually than wheel users. So, you know, you are just going to want, you know, a pick-up and play experience, which F125 does do a fantastic job of if you're on a controller inside the game as well. So I think it's found a really good balance where you're kind of able to pick up and play, like I said, but if you're on a wheel, it is a bit more kind of sim-like is probably too strong, because these games are meant to, you know, they're not meant to be full-blown simulators, but definitely provides a good balance between the two. And I think you can have a lot of fun, whichever, you know, kind of controller system you are on then. Taking a look at the direct comparison, of course, like I said, I think my wheel lap time here was about 3 seconds faster, which honestly is actually a lot closer than we've seen in other games in recent years. Of course, I would expect to be multiple seconds a lap faster on a wheel, because, like I said, I use a wheel all the time, so it's exactly what you would expect to see from myself there. But, you know, the traction out of the source, for example, really, really easy to kind of get that hookup on a controller. Of course, Spa as well, with all of the updates inside F1 24, is actually now a really, really unforgiving circuit as well on a controller. So you'll notice as we go through like Malmedy and the no-name corner after that as well, that it can be really, really difficult to kind of obviously try and get the car planted over the curb. Especially obviously on the wheel, it, you know, will break traction on you, but you can get away with it a little bit more than what we saw on last year's game as well. You can see on this lap, I actually just dipped the wheel into the gravel on the wheel lap. But yeah, both of them completely flat out as you make your way through Pool. On there again, just nicking the grass ever so slightly on the controller lap time. Of course, again, just struggling to kind of get that precision in to the corners as well. But yeah, I was pleasantly surprised, like I said, that the controller experience was pretty good. You know, like I said, you can kind of feel as well when the car's breaking free from you. This curb on the exit Stavolo is brutal, so I very quickly learned to try and get away from that. The one real corner I did struggle with was the bus stop chicane, obviously right at the end of the lap, but to be honest, it was because I was pretty happy with the controller lap time I'd done, and I really didn't want to bottle it through the final corners of the venue as well there. But yeah, if you can get the straight line braking hooked up on the controller, you really can brake quite late into the corners as well. And as you can see, like I said, a couple of seconds difference between the two of them, but much, much closer than we've seen in recent years as well. And of course, always, as is tradition with these videos, doing a couple of celebratory donuts as well. Again, actually, a bonus point goes to the controller there. It's much, much easier to kind of hold that drift, you know, or that donut, I should say, on the on the controller as well there. But there we go, my first thoughts and feelings of F1 25. Of course, we might see patches, we might see slight changes to the handling model as, you know, we kind of progress throughout F1 25. But I think, you know, if you shied away from the last couple of games because you've been on a controller and you've been a little bit nervous about it, perhaps, for example, you bought F1 22, couldn't drive to save your life because that game was horrible, and then have kind of come back and thought maybe F1 25 is the game you're going to pick up, I would absolutely say go for it. I would recommend grabbing it if you're on a controller as well as on a wheel. It's two very different experiences, but they absolutely suit kind of both control types as well there. But yeah, let me know your thoughts and feelings down on the comments below. If you have enjoyed this video, please do make sure you leave a like, get yourself subscribed. We're trying to hit 150,000 subs on the channel. And yeah, we'll be back very soon with more F1 25 content.